Elena Kozlova never imagined that her quiet life as a university language professor would thrust her into the heart of a war zone. At 32, she had spent most of her adult life buried in dusty academic books, translating ancient texts and teaching eager students the intricacies of multiple languages. Her world consisted of lecture halls, coffee shops near the university, and her small apartment filled with dictionaries in 7 different languages. When the conflict erupted in her homeland, Elena initially tried to maintain her normal routine. She continued teaching her classes, grading papers, and living as if the distant sound of artillery was merely thunder from approaching storms. The university administration assured faculty and students that their city would remain safe, that the fighting was concentrated in border regions far from their academic sanctuary. Everything changed on a cold Tuesday morning in October, when government officials arrived at the university with an urgent request. They needed experienced translators to assist with humanitarian efforts and refugee coordination. Elena's fluency in Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, German, and English made her an invaluable asset. The officials painted a picture of helping displaced families, translating medical records, and facilitating aid distribution. Elena reluctantly agreed to a temporary assignment, believing she would spend a few weeks in a secure government facility translating documents. She packed a small suitcase with enough clothes for what she assumed would be a brief stint away from her comfortable academic life. Her colleagues wished her well, joking that she would probably be back before the next faculty meeting. The reality proved far different from what she had been told. Instead of a comfortable government building, Elena found herself assigned to a forward operating base just 12 kilometers from active fighting. The base was a converted school building, surrounded by concrete barriers, sandbags, and razor wire. Military vehicles came and went at all hours, and the constant rumble of helicopters overhead reminded everyone that they were in a dangerous place. Colonel Petrov, the base commander, was a weathered man in his 50s who had seen too many conflicts. He explained Elena's role with military directness. She would be responsible for translating intercepted communications, interrogating captured enemy personnel, and providing linguistic support for various operations. The colonel made it clear that her work was not optional and that she would remain at the base until further notice. Elena's living quarters consisted of a small room in what had once been the school's library. Her bed was a military cot, and her workspace was a folding table with a basic laptop and communication equipment. The walls still displayed faded educational posters about literature and mathematics, creating a surreal contrast with the military equipment that now filled the space. The first few days were overwhelming. Elena struggled to adapt to military routines, early morning briefings, and the constant tension that permeated the base. She translated routine communications and administrative documents, work that felt familiar despite the unusual circumstances. The soldiers treated her with polite distance, seeing her as a civilian contractor who didn't quite belong in their world. Captain Morrison, an American military advisor, became Elena's primary contact for assignments. He was younger than she expected, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of intense focus that came from combat experience. Morrison explained the importance of accurate translation in military contexts, where a single misunderstood word could mean the difference between success and disaster. Elena's first significant assignment involved translating intercepted radio communications between enemy units. The work required intense concentration as she listened to scratchy recordings through military headphones, trying to extract meaningful intelligence from fragments of conversation. The enemy forces used coded language and regional dialects that made translation challenging, but Elena's academic background in linguistics helped her recognize patterns and interpret subtle meanings. As weeks passed, Elena began to understand the rhythm of military life. She learned to recognize different types of aircraft by their sound, to distinguish between incoming and outgoing artillery, and to read the mood of the base by observing how soldiers moved and talked. The constant stress started to feel normal, and she found herself developing the kind of situational awareness that came from living in a dangerous place. The turning point came during her 6th week at the base. Intelligence reports indicated increased enemy activity in the surrounding area, and the base went to high alert. Elena could sense the change in atmosphere as soldiers checked their equipment more frequently and officers huddled in serious conversations. The usual casual banter among troops was replaced by focused preparation. Late one evening, Elena was working in her makeshift office when Captain Morrison burst through the door with unusual urgency. He explained that a reconnaissance patrol had captured an enemy sniper during a firefight about 8 kilometers from the base. The prisoner was wounded but conscious, and initial attempts at communication had failed because none of the military personnel spoke his language fluently enough for effective interrogation. The captured sniper was a significant intelligence opportunity. Enemy snipers typically operated independently and had detailed knowledge of local terrain, friendly force positions, and future operational plans. If they could successfully interrogate him, the information might prevent future attacks and save lives. Morrison emphasized that Elena's linguistic skills could be crucial to extracting this vital intelligence. Elena felt a mixture of anxiety and responsibility as she followed Morrison to the detention facility. She had never been involved in interrogating a prisoner of war, and the prospect made her uncomfortable. Her academic experience with languages had never involved high-stakes situations where lives hung in the balance. She worried about her ability to handle the psychological pressure of the situation. The detention facility was located in what had been the school's administrative building. The prisoner was being held in a secure room that had once been the principal's office. Medical personnel had treated his wounds, and he was conscious but clearly in pain from a leg injury sustained during his capture. Elena could see immediately that he was young, probably not much older than her university students. The sniper's equipment had been carefully cataloged and secured. Among his possessions was a Dragunov sniper rifle, a weapon Elena recognized from military documentaries and news reports. The rifle represented the deadly precision with which enemy forces had been targeting their positions. Looking at the weapon made the conflict feel more personal and immediate than translating intercepted communications ever had. Morrison briefed Elena on interrogation protocols and the specific information they needed to obtain. Priority intelligence included the locations of other enemy positions, planned attacks against the base, and details about command structure and communication methods. The captain emphasized the importance of establishing rapport with the prisoner and gathering information through conversation rather than confrontation. Elena approached the interrogation with the same methodical preparation she brought to complex translation projects. She reviewed available intelligence about enemy forces in the area, studied maps of local terrain, and prepared questions designed to elicit useful information without appearing threatening. Her academic training in understanding cultural context and communication patterns proved unexpectedly relevant to the military situation. The first interrogation session lasted 3 hours and yielded limited results. The prisoner, who identified himself only as Dmitri, was suspicious and reluctant to provide any meaningful information. Elena could sense his intelligence and determination despite his youth and injured condition. He answered basic questions about his identity, but deflected attempts to gather tactical intelligence with skillful misdirection. Elena realized that traditional interrogation approaches might not work with this particular prisoner. Dmitri was clearly well-trained and motivated, unlikely to be intimidated or tricked into revealing sensitive information. She needed to find a different approach that played to her strengths as a linguist and teacher, rather than attempting to be something she was not. Between interrogation sessions, Elena studied everything she could learn about Dmitri's background and regional dialect. She noticed subtle variations in his speech patterns that suggested specific geographic origins, information that might help establish common ground for conversation. Her years of teaching had taught her to read people's motivations and find ways to connect with even the most reluctant students. During their second meeting, Elena shifted her approach from formal interrogation to academic discussion. She commented on Dmitri's dialect and demonstrated her knowledge of regional linguistic variations. This unexpected turn in conversation seemed to catch the prisoner off guard, and for the first time, she saw genuine interest in his eyes rather than calculated resistance. The breakthrough came when Ayla mentioned her university work with regional folk literature and traditional songs. Dmitri revealed that his grandmother had been a keeper of local folk traditions, and he had grown up hearing many of the same stories and songs that Ayla had studied academically. This connection created the first crack in his defensive facade. Over the following days, Elena continued building rapport with Dmitri through their shared interest in cultural heritage and language. She brought books of regional poetry to their sessions and engaged him in discussions that reminded him of conversations he might have had with professors or educated friends before the war. Gradually, he began to see her as a fellow intellectual, rather than an enemy interrogator. The relationship between Elena and Dmitri became increasingly complex as they spent hours in conversation. She found herself genuinely liking the young man despite knowing he was a trained killer who had been targeting her fellow base personnel. Dmitri, meanwhile, seemed to appreciate having someone who could engage with his intelligence and cultural background, rather than treating him simply as a source of military intelligence. Captain Morrison grew increasingly impatient with the slow pace of intelligence gathering. He reminded Elena repeatedly that time was critical and that enemy forces might launch attacks while they waited for breakthrough information. The pressure to produce results weighed heavily on Elena, but she insisted that rushing the process would likely destroy the fragile trust she had been building with Dmitri. Elena's approach finally began yielding results during their 8th session together. Dmitri casually mentioned details about enemy positions while discussing hunting grounds from his childhood. He revealed information about communication schedules while explaining how his unit coordinated activities with traditional signaling methods used by local hunters. The intelligence came naturally through conversation rather than formal questioning. The most significant revelation came when Dmitri began talking about his concerns for civilian safety in the conflict zone. Elena recognized this as an opportunity to explore his knowledge of planned operations, without directly asking for military secrets. Through careful conversation, she learned about an enemy plan to attack a refugee convoy that was scheduled to pass near their base in 3 days. Elena immediately reported this intelligence to Captain Morrison and Colonel Petrov. The information allowed base personnel to coordinate with convoy security forces and establish protective positions along the route. The successful prevention of an attack on civilians validated Elena's patient approach to interrogation and established her credibility with military leadership. As word of Elena's success spread throughout the base, soldiers began treating her with new respect. She was no longer seen as a civilian contractor who didn't belong in their world, but as a valuable team member who had contributed directly to their mission success. The transformation in how others viewed her work gave Elena a sense of purpose she had never experienced in her academic career. However, Elena also struggled with the ethical implications of her growing relationship with Dmitri. She genuinely cared about his well-being and felt conflicted about using their personal connection to extract military intelligence that could harm his former comrades. The clear moral boundaries of her previous academic life had become complicated in ways she had never anticipated. The situation became even more complex when Elena learned that Dmitri would eventually be transferred to a higher security facility for additional interrogation by specialists. She realized that their conversations had given her unique insights into enemy tactics and psychology that could be valuable beyond the immediate tactical intelligence she had already provided. Colonel Petrov called Elena to a private meeting to discuss her future role at the base. He explained that her success with Dmitri had demonstrated abilities that went far beyond simple translation work. The colonel wanted Elena to take on expanded responsibilities that would involve deeper involvement in intelligence operations and strategic planning. Elena found herself at a crossroads that would determine her future role in the conflict. She could return to her safe academic life and try to forget about her brief military experience. Or she could embrace this new identity as someone whose linguistic skills could make a real difference in a dangerous world. The choice would define not only her immediate future, but her understanding of who she was capable of becoming. The young professor who had reluctantly agreed to a temporary translation assignment was beginning to disappear, replaced by someone who understood that her skills could be weapons as powerful as any rifle in the right circumstances. Elena was discovering capabilities within herself that she had never known existed, capabilities that would soon prove essential to the survival of everyone around her. Elena's decision to stay at the forward operating base marked the beginning of a transformation that would test every assumption she had about herself and her capabilities. Colonel Petrov's expanded role for her meant leaving behind the safety of routine translation work and embracing responsibilities that would put her directly in harm's way. Her first major assignment under the new arrangement involved accompanying a reconnaissance team to investigate suspicious activity in an abandoned industrial complex 15 kilometers from the base. Intelligence suggested that enemy forces were using the facility as a staging area for attacks, but confirmation required someone who could interpret documents, communications equipment, and potentially question any personnel they might encounter. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, who led the reconnaissance team, was initially skeptical about bringing a civilian translator into a potentially dangerous situation. Chen was a professional soldier who had spent years developing the skills and instincts necessary for survival in combat zones. She worried that Elena's lack of military training would make her a liability that could endanger the entire team. Elena understood Chen's concerns and spent the week before the mission learning basic military procedures from base personnel. Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran with multiple deployments, taught her how to move quietly, use cover effectively, and communicate with hand signals. The training was intensive and exhausting, but Elena approached it with the same dedication she had once applied to mastering complex grammatical structures. The abandoned industrial complex had once been a textile manufacturing facility that employed hundreds of local residents. Now its empty buildings and silent machinery created an eerie landscape of broken windows and rusted equipment. The team approached the facility at dawn, moving carefully through overgrown vegetation that had begun reclaiming the abandoned property. Elena's first contribution came when they discovered recent tire tracks leading to one of the main buildings. She recognized that the tire patterns matched vehicles commonly used by enemy forces, information she had learned during her work translating maintenance logs and supply requisitions. This confirmation allowed Chen to call for additional support before the team proceeded deeper into the complex. Inside the main manufacturing building, they found evidence of recent occupation. Elena translated discarded documents that revealed details about enemy supply chains and communication protocols. More importantly, she discovered a partially destroyed map that showed planned attack routes against multiple targets, including their own base and several civilian evacuation centers. The intelligence-gathering mission became exponentially more dangerous when they encountered an enemy patrol that had returned unexpectedly to the facility. Chen's team found themselves outnumbered and surrounded, trapped in a building with limited escape routes, and facing opponents who knew the terrain better than they did. The situation quickly evolved from reconnaissance to a desperate fight for survival. Elena's linguistic abilities became crucial when she overheard enemy communications through their radio equipment. She was able to provide real-time translation of tactical instructions, warning Chen's team about flanking maneuvers and coordinated attacks before they developed. Her translations allowed the outnumbered reconnaissance team to anticipate enemy movements and respond more effectively than would have been possible without advance warning. During the firefight, Elena discovered reserves of courage and determination she had never known she possessed. When Sergeant Martinez was wounded by enemy fire, she crawled across exposed ground under intense shooting to provide first aid and drag him to safety behind cover. The academic who had once been afraid of confrontational faculty meetings was now risking her life to save wounded soldiers. The battle lasted 4 hours before reinforcements arrived to evacuate Chen's team. Elena's continuous translation of enemy communications had been instrumental in keeping everyone alive, but the experience left her shaken and questioning whether she was prepared for the realities of her expanded role. She had crossed a line from supporting military operations to participating directly in combat. Back at the base, Elena struggled with the psychological aftermath of her first combat experience. The abstract nature of her previous translation work had insulated her from the immediate human cost of the conflict. Now she had seen friends wounded, had felt bullets passing close to her head, and had participated directly in violence that resulted in enemy casualties. Captain Morrison recognized Elena's distress and arranged for her to speak with the base chaplain, Father Miguel, who had experience counseling soldiers dealing with combat trauma. Elena found their conversations helpful, but she also realized that her civilian background had not prepared her for processing the complex emotions that came with violent conflict. The intelligence Elena's team had gathered at the industrial complex proved invaluable for preventing a coordinated enemy attack that would have targeted multiple civilian and military locations simultaneously. The maps and documents they recovered allowed base commanders to warn potential targets and position defensive forces more effectively. Elena's dangerous mission had directly saved hundreds of lives. Colonel Petrov commended Elena's performance and offered her an even more significant role in intelligence operations. The military leadership was impressed by her ability to adapt to combat situations while maintaining the analytical skills that made her translations so valuable. They wanted her to lead a specialized team focused on linguistic intelligence gathering and enemy communication analysis. Elena accepted the new position with mixed emotions. She felt proud of her contributions and was beginning to understand that her unique combination of skills could make a real difference in the conflict. However, she also worried about losing touch with the person she had been before the war and wondered whether she could ever return to her previous academic life after everything she had experienced. Her new role required Elena to recruit and train additional translators to work under her supervision. She reached out to former colleagues and graduate students, many of whom had fled the conflict zone when fighting intensified. Convincing qualified linguists to join a dangerous military operation proved challenging, but Elena's reputation and personal appeals eventually attracted several volunteers. Dr. Salabi, Anna Volkov, Elena's former colleague from the university's linguistics department, was among the first to join the team. Anna brought expertise in cryptography and code breaking that proved valuable for interpreting enemy communications that used sophisticated encryption methods. Her recruitment marked the beginning of what would become a highly effective intelligence unit. The linguistic intelligence team's first major success came when they cracked an enemy communication code that had been puzzling military cryptographers for months. Elena realized that the code was based on a regional dialect that incorporated archaic grammatical structures unfamiliar to standard military translators. Her academic background in historical linguistics provided the key to understanding the enemy's sophisticated communication system. Decrypting enemy communications revealed an ambitious plan to capture the forward operating base through a coordinated night attack involving multiple units and specialized equipment. The attack was scheduled for the following week and would have been devastating if it had achieved surprise. Elena's team had provided warning that allowed base personnel to prepare appropriate defenses and call for reinforcements. The success of the Linguistic Intelligence Unit established Elena as an essential member of the base's command structure. Colonel Petrov began including her in strategic planning meetings, where her insights into enemy communication patterns and tactical thinking influenced major operational decisions. She had evolved from a reluctant civilian contractor to a key military advisor. Elena's transformation was not without personal costs. She found herself becoming more suspicious and analytical in all her interactions, constantly listening for hidden meanings and potential deceptions. The skills that made her effective in intelligence work began affecting her ability to have normal conversations and relationships. She worried that the war was changing her in ways that might be irreversible. The prisoner Dmitri remained at the base longer than originally planned because Elena's ongoing conversations with him continued yielding valuable intelligence. Their relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship, despite the circumstances that had brought them together. Dmitri seemed to appreciate having someone who treated him as an individual rather than simply an enemy combatant. Through her extended conversations with Dmitri, Elena learned about enemy morale problems, leadership conflicts, and strategic disagreements that were not apparent from intercepted communications. This human intelligence provided context that made technical intelligence more valuable and actionable. Elena began to understand that her ability to connect with people was as important as her linguistic skills. The ethical complexity of Elena's relationship with Dmitri intensified when she learned that he had been providing information that directly contributed to military operations against his former comrades. She realized that their friendship had become a weapon she was using to gather intelligence, and she struggled with guilt about manipulating someone who trusted her. Dmitri seemed to understand the nature of their relationship and its implications for his former unit. During one of their conversations, he mentioned that he had begun to question the cause he had been fighting for, and wondered whether the war was accomplishing anything meaningful for anyone involved. Elena recognized this as a profound psychological shift that went beyond simple cooperation with captors. The conversations with Dmitri also provided Elena with insights into enemy psychology and motivation that helped her understand intercepted communications more effectively. She began to recognize emotional undertones and cultural references that revealed important information about enemy morale, supply problems, and strategic thinking. This psychological intelligence proved as valuable as tactical information. Elena's success in developing human intelligence sources led to requests from other bases for her assistance with difficult prisoners and complex communication intercepts. She found herself traveling to different locations throughout the conflict zone, always accompanied by security details but increasingly operating as an independent intelligence asset rather than support personnel attached to a specific unit. One particularly challenging assignment took Elena to a base near the coast, where maritime intelligence had become crucial to preventing enemy infiltration by sea. The linguistic patterns in intercepted naval communications were different from the land-based forces she had been studying, requiring her to quickly develop expertise in maritime terminology and navigation concepts. Working with naval intelligence officers, Elena discovered that enemy forces were planning to land special operations teams at several points along the coast to conduct sabotage operations against supply depots and communication facilities. The intercepted communications revealed not only the planned landing sites, but also the timing and objectives of the infiltration missions. Elena's analysis of the maritime communications allowed coastal defense forces to position appropriately and capture most of the infiltrating teams before they could accomplish their objectives. The success demonstrated her ability to adapt her skills to different types of military operations and established her reputation throughout the theater of operations. The demands of Elena's expanding role began affecting her physical and mental health. She was working long hours under constant stress, sleeping irregularly and eating poorly. The base medical officer expressed concern about her condition and recommended that she take leave to recover from the accumulated stress of months in a combat zone. Elena resisted taking leave because she felt that her work was too important to interrupt. She had become emotionally invested in the success of operations that depended on her linguistic analysis, and she worried that temporary replacements would not be able to maintain the same level of effectiveness. Her dedication was admirable but also potentially self-destructive. The situation reached a crisis point when Elena collapsed during a briefing session with senior officers. Medical examination revealed that she was suffering from exhaustion, dehydration, and the physical symptoms of chronic stress. Colonel Petrov ordered her to take mandatory leave and threatened to have her removed from the base if she did not comply with medical recommendations. During her enforced rest period, Elena had time to reflect on how dramatically her life had changed since she first arrived at the forward operating base. The quiet academic who had reluctantly agreed to temporary translation work had become a key intelligence operative whose skills were essential to military operations throughout the region. She had discovered capabilities within herself that she had never imagined possessing. Elena also recognized that her transformation had come at significant personal cost. She had lost touch with friends from her previous life, had no romantic relationships, and felt disconnected from the interests and activities that had once brought her joy. The war had given her purpose and demonstrated her capabilities, but it had also consumed her identity in ways that concerned her. The forced break also allowed Elena to spend more time with Dmitri, whose transfer to a higher security facility had been delayed due to the continuing value of the intelligence he provided. Their conversations during this period became more personal and philosophical, exploring questions about identity, purpose, and the meaning of their experiences in the conflict. Dmitri revealed that he had grown up wanting to be a teacher like his grandmother, who had educated children in their village for 40 years. The war had interrupted his university studies and forced him into military service, but he still dreamed of returning to education when the conflict ended. Elena was struck by the parallels between their backgrounds and the different paths that circumstances had forced them to take. Their discussions about post-war plans and hopes for the future made Elena realize how much the conflict had changed her own aspirations. She no longer felt certain about returning to university life, but she also could not imagine continuing indefinitely in military intelligence work. The war had opened possibilities she had never considered while also closing doors she had once thought would always be available. As Elena's leave period ended, she prepared to return to active duty with a better understanding of both her capabilities and her limitations. She had learned that she could be effective in dangerous and demanding situations, but she had also recognized the importance of maintaining some connection to the person she had been before the war. The challenge would be finding ways to serve effectively while preserving her humanity and her hopes for a different future. Elena returned to active duty with renewed focus, but also with a clearer understanding of the personal boundaries she needed to maintain to survive psychologically. Her forced leave had given her perspective on how completely she had immersed herself in military operations, and she was determined to find ways to preserve some connection to her pre-war identity while continuing her vital intelligence work. The situation at the forward operating base had evolved significantly during Elena's absence. Enemy forces had adapted their communication methods in response to the intelligence successes her team had achieved. implementing new encryption systems and changing operational procedures to minimize vulnerability to interception. Elena found herself facing a more sophisticated adversary that required her to develop new analytical approaches. Dr. Anna Volkov had assumed leadership of the linguistic intelligence team during Elena's leave and had recruited 2 additional specialists with backgrounds in computer science and advanced cryptography. The expanded team was better equipped to handle complex technical challenges, but Elena's unique combination of linguistic expertise and operational experience remained irreplaceable for interpreting the human elements of enemy communications. Elena's first assignment upon returning involved analyzing communications intercepts that suggested a major shift in enemy strategy. Rather than continuing the pattern of localized attacks and harassment operations, intelligence indicators pointed toward preparation for a significant offensive operation that would involve multiple coordinated units and sophisticated equipment. The implications were serious enough to warrant immediate attention from theater-level commanders. Working with her expanded team, Elena began systematically analyzing months of intercepted communications to identify patterns that might reveal the scope and timing of the planned offensive. The work required combining traditional linguistic analysis with advanced statistical methods and computer modeling techniques that stretched her analytical capabilities in new directions. The breakthrough came when Elena recognized that recent enemy communications contained subtle references to historical military campaigns that had taken place in the same region during previous conflicts. The references were too obscure to be accidental and appeared to be coded instructions that used historical knowledge as a form of encryption. Elena's academic background in regional history provided the key to understanding this sophisticated communication system. Decoding the historical references revealed that enemy forces were planning a 3-phase offensive operation designed to capture multiple strategic objectives simultaneously while preventing effective defensive coordination. The operation was scheduled to begin in 6 days and would involve forces that significantly outnumbered the defenders at all targeted locations. Elena's analysis indicated that the forward operating base where she worked was not a primary target for the offensive, but it would likely face probing attacks designed to prevent reinforcements from being sent to defend more critical positions. The intelligence allowed Colonel Petrov to prepare appropriate defenses while also contributing information to the broader defensive coordination effort. More importantly, Elena's work revealed that the enemy offensive was dependent on capturing a specific transportation hub that controlled access to the region. If defensive forces could hold this position, the entire offensive would likely collapse due to logistical constraints. This insight allowed theater commanders to concentrate defensive resources where they would be most effective. The days leading up to the expected offensive were filled with intense preparation as military units throughout the region repositioned forces and prepared for coordinated defensive operations. Elena found herself working around the clock to provide real-time analysis of enemy communications as the situation developed, looking for any indication that plans had changed or that timing had been accelerated. Elena's relationship with Dmitri became even more complex during this period, as she tried to gather additional intelligence about the offensive without compromising the trust they had built over months of conversation. Dmitri seemed to sense the increased urgency around the base and began asking questions about Elena's work that she could not answer directly without revealing operational security information. During one of their conversations, Dmitri mentioned that he had been having nightmares about his former comrades and worried about their safety in upcoming operations. Elena realized that he might have information about the planned offensive that he had not yet revealed, but she also understood that extracting this information would require her to exploit his emotional vulnerability in ways that troubled her conscience. The ethical dilemma intensified when Elena learned that Dmitri's former unit was likely to be involved in the most dangerous phase of the offensive operation. If she could gather specific information about their planned role, it might be possible to warn them or take other actions that would save lives. However, obtaining this information would require deceiving someone who had come to trust her and consider her a friend. Elena decided to approach the situation indirectly by encouraging Dmitri to talk about his concerns for his former comrades without explicitly asking for operational information. Through patient conversation, she learned that his unit had been assigned a mission that most members considered essentially suicidal, but that they felt obligated to attempt due to unit pride and loyalty to their commander. The information Dmitri provided allowed Elena to identify his former unit's likely role in the offensive and to warn defensive forces about the specific tactics they typically employed. More importantly, it confirmed her analysis of the overall operational plan and provided additional detail about timing and coordination between different enemy units. When the offensive began, Elena's intelligence analysis proved remarkably accurate. Enemy forces attacked exactly when and where her team had predicted, using the tactics and coordination methods her analysis had identified. The defensive preparations based on her intelligence work were instrumental in repelling the initial attacks and disrupting the enemy's operational timeline. However, the fighting was more intense than anyone had anticipated. The forward operating base came under sustained attack for 3 days as enemy forces attempted to prevent reinforcements from moving to defend more critical positions. Elena found herself in the unusual position of providing real-time intelligence analysis while also dealing with the immediate dangers of being under fire. During the second day of fighting, a direct hit on the base's communication facility severely damaged the equipment Elena's team used for intercepting and analyzing enemy transmissions. Without this capability, the defenders lost their primary source of tactical intelligence just when they needed it most. Elena realized that alternative methods would be necessary to maintain intelligence support for the defensive operation. The solution came from an unexpected source. Dmitri volunteered to help interpret enemy communications that could be overheard through conventional radio equipment, despite knowing that his assistance would be considered treason by his former comrades. His decision represented a complete psychological break with his previous loyalties and demonstrated the extent to which his relationship with Elena had influenced his thinking. Working together, Elena and Dmitri were able to provide sufficient intelligence to help the base defenders anticipate enemy attacks and coordinate more effective resistance. Their collaboration was awkward and emotionally complex, but it proved essential for survival during the most dangerous phase of the fighting. Elena found herself depending on someone she had originally interrogated as a prisoner. The partnership between Elena and Dmitri also provided insights into enemy morale and tactical thinking that would not have been available through technical intercepts alone. Dmitri could recognize voices of specific commanders and understood the subtle communications that revealed uncertainty, fatigue, and tactical confusion among attacking forces. This human intelligence proved as valuable as technical analysis. On the third day of fighting, enemy forces made a final desperate attempt to overrun the forward operating base before reinforcements could arrive. The attack involved coordinated assaults from multiple directions using concentrated firepower and specialized equipment. Elena and Dmitri worked together to track the movement of different enemy units and warn defenders about the timing and direction of the most dangerous attacks. During the climactic battle, Elena made a decision that completed her transformation from reluctant civilian contractor to committed military operative. When the base's senior intelligence officer was wounded, she assumed responsibility for coordinating all intelligence support for the defensive operation. Her actions during this period saved numerous lives and contributed directly to the successful defense of the position. The experience of leading intelligence operations under extreme combat conditions gave Elena confidence in capabilities she had never fully tested. She realized that her unique combination of linguistic skills, analytical thinking, and operational experience had made her genuinely valuable in ways that went far beyond simple translation work. She had become someone whose loss would significantly impact military operations throughout the region. When reinforcements finally arrived and the immediate danger passed, Elena found herself facing decisions about her future that would define the rest of her life. Military leadership offered her a permanent commission, with significant responsibilities for intelligence operations throughout the theater. The offer represented recognition of her contributions and promised continued opportunities to make a meaningful difference in the conflict. However, Elena also received word that her university was planning to reopen when security conditions improved and that her former position would be available if she chose to return to academic life. The prospect of returning to her previous existence appealed to the part of her that missed the intellectual stimulation and personal relationships of civilian life. Elena's relationship with Dmitri had become another factor in her decision-making process. His assistance during the battle had resulted in a recommendation that he be transferred to a more comfortable detention facility and eventually considered for prisoner exchange or parole. Elena felt responsible for his welfare and wanted to ensure that his cooperation with defensive forces would be properly recognized. More personally, Elena had begun to care about Dmitri as an individual and was troubled by the ethical implications of their relationship. She wondered whether her feelings were genuine or whether they had been influenced by the intense circumstances of their interaction. The question of what would happen to their relationship after the war added another layer of complexity to her future planning. The aftermath of the successful defense brought Elena recognition that extended far beyond the forward operating base. Theater commanders requested her assistance with intelligence operations throughout the region, and her reputation as a skilled linguistic analyst spread to military units in other areas of the conflict. She had become a valuable asset whose skills were in high demand. Elena's success also brought media attention that made her uncomfortable. Journalists wanted to write stories about the university professor who had become a key military intelligence operative, but Elena preferred to avoid publicity that might compromise her effectiveness or put her in personal danger. She struggled with balancing public recognition of her contributions with operational security requirements. The expanded recognition also brought Elena into contact with other civilians who had found themselves playing unexpected roles in the military effort. She met doctors who had become combat medics, engineers who had become demolitions experts, and teachers who had become logistics coordinators. These relationships helped Elena understand that her transformation was part of a broader pattern of ordinary people discovering extraordinary capabilities. During a brief leave period, Elena visited her former university and was struck by how foreign her previous academic life now seemed. The concerns and interests that had once absorbed her attention felt disconnected from the life-and-death issues she now dealt with daily. She realized that the war had changed her in ways that would make it difficult to return to her former existence. Elena's final decision about her future came when she learned that enemy forces were planning another major offensive that would require the kind of sophisticated intelligence analysis her team had developed. She realized that her unique skills could continue making a vital difference in protecting both military personnel and civilian populations from the devastating effects of the conflict. Elena chose to remain with military intelligence operations, but she also negotiated arrangements that would allow her to maintain some connection to academic life through consulting relationships with universities and research institutions. She hoped this compromise would enable her to serve effectively while preserving intellectual interests that remained important to her personal identity. The decision represented Elena's acceptance of the person she had become through her wartime experiences. She was no longer the reluctant civilian contractor who had been temporarily assigned to translation duties. She had become someone whose courage, intelligence, and dedication had proven essential to the survival of everyone around her. Someone who could not walk away from responsibilities that only she was equipped to handle. Elena's story demonstrates how extraordinary circumstances can reveal capabilities that individuals never knew they possessed. The quiet university professor had discovered that she could be brave under fire, could make life-and-death decisions under pressure, and could adapt her academic skills to military applications that saved lives and influenced strategic outcomes. The captured Dragunov that had initially represented enemy precision and lethality had become a symbol of Elena's transformation, like the weapon that had been turned from an instrument of attack into a source of intelligence. Elena herself had been transformed from someone who studied conflict academically into someone who could shape its outcome through direct participation. Her linguistic abilities had indeed become weapons as powerful as any rifle. Wielded by someone who had discovered reserves of courage and determination she never knew existed. Elena's journey from reluctant translator to essential intelligence operative illustrates the profound ways that individuals can be changed by their response to crisis and their willingness to embrace responsibilities they never expected to bear. She had become the sole reason many people survived not through physical strength or military training, but through intellectual courage and the determination to use every capability she possessed in service of protecting others from the devastating consequences of war.